Thank you, Kara. Thank you, Kara, for organizing, and thank you to the Social Pedagogy Conference for having me. I would like to make a clarification before we start. I heard Tara reading the title of my presentation, and I realized that it might not be clear to some of the attendees what I mean by Greek Cypriot students. So I will give a very brief background on Cyprus's history, which I done in my presentation, and I realized I should have. Cyprus has been officially de facto divided since 1974. It has actually been physically divided. The two communities, that is the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots, have been physically separated since 1967. The Cyprus was part of the Ottoman Empire, and after that it was a British colony. So when the British came, they established a constitution which named the people of the Cyprus, who up to that point called themselves Muslims and Christians. They followed the Ottoman system of millet. So they divided themselves, and they saw themselves in mainly in terms of religious identities, not ethnic identities. So when the British came and they said a written constitution, they named the people Greeks of Cyprus and Turks of Cyprus. And that, in combination with the rising nationalisms, both in Greece and Turkey at the time, brought a rising of the local nationalisms, simultaneous rise of a Greek nationalism and a Turkish nationalism. So that culminated in it took actual form in the 50s, and then we had intercommunal conflict in the 60s when the two communities were separated. And then the two communities were officially separated in 1974. What I call as a Greek Cypriot students are the students of the Republic of Cyprus, which is the officially recognized entity. So that is what is left from the independent state that was given to Cyprus by the British in 1960. So when the British left with a system of guarantees, provided Cyprus with independence, and the governance was split between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, who were supposed to run together the government and the state, and that collapsed. So the Republic of Cyprus is what is, let's say, left, the continuity of the recognized state, and in the north, what exists is what is called the Turkish Republic of North Cyprus, which is not recognized officially, and it's run by a Turkish Cypriot administration. So that's a historic background, so as to make sure I clarify what I mean by Greek Cypriots. And also this historic background will, I believe, is very useful to give light to elaborate some of the points I will be making about the Cyprus, about my presentation. So if you bear with me, I want to share my slides with you. So today I'll be talking about history education in Cyprus, a social justice inquiry. This presentation, the idea for this presentation started from the loose ends of my thesis. So my thesis was on Greek Cypriot students' understandings, ideas about conflicting historical accounts, and I think from my a brief background on Cyprus's history, it's clear why I chose to see how young people think about different interpretations in an island that is still divided. So what I saw analyzing and discussing my data is that students in Greek Cypriot students, in comparison to their peers, have unsophisticated ideas. They are driven more by memory rather than history in explaining different interpretations, and they lacked the tools for engaging with the discipline of history. And that is, of course, not their fault, because they are educated, they are schooled in a system that does not provide them with the necessary tools to understand history and understand their past. So ending my PhD thesis, one of my loose ends was raising the questions: history education for what, for whom, and how. So this is how the idea for this presentation came about. Now going to the concepts, just a brief clarification on how I see the relationship between social pedagogy and social justice. I see social justice both as the means and the final goal for a social pedagogy that is purposeful and social justice oriented and is relevant to a changing society. Also, I use the term humanization by Freire in a kind of loose way, within the spirit of Freire. Of course, Freire wrote and thought in a very different context, at a different time and at a different place. But his concept of humanization as the transformation of human beings from objects to subjects who know and act is very relevant for me and what I do. So my abstract, I will provide an overview of history education in the Republic of Cyprus. By doing so, I will demonstrate that in the Republic of Cyprus, there is a lack of critical history education, which prohibits openings and questionings for students. And that history education is not only uncritical, it enables and encourages oppressive practices. And it therefore denies students the right to transform as human beings. I will therefore argue that our history education system is one that dehumanizes students and subsequently one that hinders social justice. Now, the Republic of Cyprus until today has an especially traditional educational system, which is mirrored in history education. Some of the main features of the history education in the Republic of Cyprus are that it's teacher-centered, has a single national curriculum, a single textbook, which is written by appointed people, appointed by the government, and is based on a third-person narration, what has been called in the bibliography by the all-knowing author. And of course, such monolithic features do not encourage critical historical thinking. Now, the curricula. The curricula have been divided along ethno-religious lines, with the national consciousness being influenced either by Greece in the south or by Turkey in the north. The existence of ethnocentric textbooks have been in place before 1974, because as I mentioned before, the two communities of the island were established as Greeks and Turks, and they oriented themselves in this way. So they, for example, modeled the schools based on those of the motherlands, that is Greece and Turkey. Now the textbooks, something quite interesting, and I think it speaks for itself when we speak of social justice, is that until a few years ago, the textbooks we had were textbooks from Greece for the Greek Cypriots and from Turkey for the Turkish Cypriot students. So the students in the Republic of Cyprus were taught the history of Greece, and the students at the north, the Turkish Cypriot students, were taught the history of the motherland of Turkey. In recent years, local textbooks, that is textbooks on Cyprus's history, were commissioned by both communities. We do have these books. These textbooks are taught, but they are seen as supplementary for many reasons. For example, in the exams that students take for university admission, the Cyprus history is not examined. So to a large degree, Cyprus history is something which exists at the side. In primary school, this is not the case, because in primary school, teachers are more flexible and there isn't so much pressure on covering the content. As I mentioned before, there is a third-person narration, which frames historical study as memorizing facts and sources where these exist. If they do exist, they support the main text. Now, the hidden curriculum. Along with curricula and textbooks, the hidden curriculum operates what could be called history for justification. That is, history being taught for justifying the unjust that was done to us, the suffering of the nation, and the current policies of the nation. An example of the hidden curriculum is the national celebrations we do. And here I should mention that in schools, we honor and we celebrate the national celebrations of Greece as well. And the same happens with the Turkish Cypriot students. They celebrate the national anniversaries of Turkey. So, for example, in the Greek Cypriot school, we celebrate the rising against the British rule. And these celebrations seek to instill the fighting spirit and the struggle. Here I should also mention that the hidden curriculum and history for justification exists in things like students' notebooks. Now these notebooks are quite rare, but until a few years ago, students' notebooks featured a cover where Cyprus was divided, split, and bleeding, with the slogan, "I do not forget," at the bottom. And I will come back to that later. So overall, we have a history for justification in both communities across the divide. History education can be summarized as follows. It propagates a narrative that focuses on the suffering of the nation, and by nation we mean the community, which sees itself as a nation together with the motherland and seeks to legitimate the political goals, both through the hidden curriculum and official policies. So the school goals have oriented around the liberation of the country, and by country in the south, in the Greek Cypriot school, we mean the south. When we speak of the country, we mean the south exclusively. And subsequently, the responsibility not to forget the Turkish invasion is the slogan I mentioned before, "Do not forget." Another feature of the Cyprus educational system and history education system, it is that it is teacher-centered. However, there isn't adequate teacher development. There is very little obligatory teacher development, which makes any seminars or training not obligatory. So people would choose to take them if they felt like it and if they wanted to do so. Another issue is that in the secondary school, for getting appointed in the secondary school, there is a list, and teachers are put on hold on a waiting list. So very often secondary school teachers would be in their mid-40s or even 50s before they get into school. Now, there has been educational reform, both for the Greek Cypriot school as a total and in relation to the history education. However, there has been little discussion for issues other than the content of knowledge. So mainly when we talked about educational reform, the question was, what kind of content should we have? There was a realization that our content is very ethnocentric, with all the implications that this has. There was also much talk about sources and critical thinking and disciplinary thinking. However, that stayed in the paper and is not reflected in the classroom. So what do these result to? For example, in relation to what do these features result to in relation to social justice? Taking curricula as an example in textbooks, the fact that we have a Greek textbook and a Cypriot textbook together ends up setting a problematic ethnic identity. The textbooks themselves being based almost exclusively on narration, end up with seeing time as a linear progression on events. And this is a linear progression of events that is simplified and it beautifies the past. Also, one of the problems is that it leads to an inversible teleology, cancelling therefore any agency, any human agency within history. So it denies students the opportunity to see themselves as historical beings and as historical actors. To go to the I do not forget that exists both in the official policies and much, much more in the hidden curriculum. It has defined both the social and private spheres of Cyprus to that degree that it makes it impossible to engage with historical thinking. And then, of course, teaching methods have been based on emphasizing the teacher's authority to dictate what is right and what is wrong. Overall, therefore, the teaching and learning of history in Cyprus has been such that it denies students humanization, in the sense that humanization seeks to transform human beings from objects to subjects who know and act. Now, why I call this an inhumane history education? Because whereas students are inquisitive and curious beings, their curious and creative power is cancelled. Whereas young people should have the opportunity to achieve the freedom to understand and change their conditions, they are oppressed in becoming more free and affirming their identities. Whereas education should inspire and harvest student spirit, education is enforced into banking methods and heavy transcription. And whereas the teacher's role is to co-produce knowledge with their students, teachers end up policing knowledge. Now, final thoughts. Whilst history education has the power to be a motivational force in inspiring change, knowledge, and liberation amongst their students, it manipulates its know-that and know-how in order to oppress. We should also bear in mind that it's not only students that are oppressed. The situation of oppression and dehumanization affects both the oppressors and those whom they oppress. We therefore need to take into consideration the educators as well. Another issue I would like to point out in my final thoughts is the attack on leftist history. Both in Cyprus and in other contexts, history education for social justice has been, allow me to use the word attacked, because it was accused of being not neutral, not objective, and positioned. Of course, the answer is that if someone sees current existing, the existing history education we have in Cyprus or anywhere as natural, objective, or neutral, it means they hold the power. And of course, any kind of education, any kind of curriculum is by default position and positioning. So the question we need to ask ourselves, both as educators and policymakers, is where we choose to stand. And my last point is that history education has the power, through a very rigorous disciplinary procedures and tools, to enliven the past, to help students to think of their lived experience, to help them make a hypothesis, to help them see themselves as factors, to help them engage with empathy. So it has the capacity for helping students to engage with epistemological curiosity in order to understand not only their past, but also their present and themselves in today's context, through what has been called getting lost and getting found. So that's it from me. Thank you very much.